I was staring directly at the ceiling, watching the thick aluminum of the ventilation duct warp and buckle inward. Something heavy was dragging itself through the narrow shaft directly above my head. The metal groaned. Dust showered down onto the concrete floor. The unmistakable shape of a human knee pressed a deep dent into the grate. And then the crawling stopped. It hadn't always been a nightmare. Just an hour earlier, it was the most boring Tuesday night of my life. I was 18, killing time over the summer before college. I had landed a part-time janitorial gig at my local high school. The hours were chaotic, swinging wildly from early mornings to midnight lockups, depending on the district's budget. It was a different era. There were no fisheye cameras glaring from the corners of every hallway. When the sun went down, the sprawling building belonged entirely to whoever held the master keys. That night, the head custodian, Elias, clocked out early. He was an older, stoic man who ran a tight ship. He was always polite, radiating a calm, absolute authority that made you want to follow his instructions perfectly. Before he grabbed his coat, he gave me a firm pat on the shoulder. He told me to finish up the gymnasium, lock the exterior doors, and text him if I hit any snags. His quiet confidence made me feel completely secure. I loved the solitary shifts. The truth was, I'd rush through my required tasks in 30 minutes, then find a quiet corner in the bleachers to scroll on my phone while the clock ran out. I was young. I took full advantage of the isolation. My final task for the night was simple. Elias had asked me to clear a stack of overflow folding chairs from the gym floor and haul them down to the basement storage room. I gathered a heavy stack, balancing the unwieldy plastic legs against my chest. The walk from the expansive, well-lit gym to the basement stairwell always felt like stepping between two completely different worlds. The basement didn't belong in a modern school. It was entirely poured concrete and exposed pipes, resembling the forgotten bowels of an industrial warehouse. The lighting down there was pathetic. Half the bulbs were burnt out, leaving long stretches of the room drowning in thick, oily shadows. I reached the bottom of the stairs. As I pushed the heavy fire door open, I noticed a sudden shift in the temperature. A pocket of humid, stale air brushed past my face, carrying a faint, sour scent, like unwashed laundry and wet copper. It completely masked the sharp smell of industrial bleach that usually coated the building. I ignored it, blindly trusting the safety of the empty school. The storage room was packed with discarded theater props and art department supplies. In the center, beneath a single working bulb, stood a cluster of wooden art mannequins. They were tall, featureless, and completely draped in heavy, canvas paint drop cloths to protect them from dust. They looked like a gathering of silent, faceless statues. I dumped the chairs against the far wall. The echo bounced around the concrete chamber, harsh and sudden. I turned my back to the dark corners of the room and jogged back upstairs to grab the second load. I was gone for less than 3 minutes. When I pushed through the basement door the second time, carrying the final stack of chairs, my chest instantly tightened. The air felt incredibly still, too still, like a vacuum had sucked the ambient noise out of the room. I looked toward the center of the room. The art mannequins were still there, but one of them, the one closest to the front, was completely exposed. The heavy canvas drop cloth was gone. Its jointed wooden arms hung limply by its sides. I froze. My mind desperately flipped through a mental Rolodex of the last 5 minutes. I knew with absolute certainty that every single figure had been covered when I dropped the first stack. A cold prickle broke out across the back of my neck. I slowly set the chairs down. I pulled out my phone and typed a quick message to Elias. I told him I thought someone was down in the storage room. His reply came a minute later. He simply asked what I meant. I typed back, my thumbs feeling thick and clumsy. I told him someone moved one of the heavy canvas tarps. The typing bubble on the screen bounced for a long time. Finally, he replied. He told me the building was sealed. He assured me no one else was authorized to be inside, dismissing the situation completely. I lowered my phone. That was when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, completely removed from the dim pool of overhead light, lay a crumpled mound of thick canvas, the missing drop cloth. It wasn't just tossed loosely on the floor. It was deliberately tinted. Something was hiding underneath it. I stopped breathing. The metallic taste of pure adrenaline flooded the back of my throat. I stared at the dark shape, praying it was just a pile of boxes. Then the fabric shifted. Just an inch. A slow, rhythmic rise and fall. Someone was crouched under the heavy cloth, breathing in the dark. Waiting. I didn't think. I spun around, bolted up the concrete stairs, pulled the heavy fire door shut behind me, and violently turned the deadbolt. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys. I backed away from the door, pulling my phone out again. I sent Elias a frantic text. I told him there was a person hiding under a tarp in the basement. I begged him to turn his truck around. I opened his response, expecting him to say he was pulling into the lot. Instead, the message read, "Just call the cops if you're spooked. Or be a man, open the door, and confront them." I stared at the glowing screen. The professional reassurance I desperately needed was completely stripped away. I felt a sudden, crushing weight of social pressure. I was an 18-year-old kid. I didn't want to look like a paranoid coward to my older boss. Against every instinct screaming inside my head, I stepped back to the basement door. I unlocked the deadbolt. The click echoed down the empty hallway. I forced myself down the stairs, one agonizing step at a time. The basement was utterly silent. I reached the bottom and looked toward the far corner. The thick canvas cloth was spread completely flat against the concrete floor. There was no one underneath it anymore. The air felt impossibly heavy. Whoever it was hadn't gone up the stairs. They were still down here with me, in the dark. That's when the noise started. Not from the shadows, from directly above my head. It was a violent, metallic scraping. I snapped my head up. The ceiling in the basement was exposed, crisscrossed by massive rectangular air ducts wide enough to fit a person. Something heavy was dragging itself through the tin shaft. I watched, paralyzed, as the thin metal began to warp downward under the shifting weight. The crawling stopped directly over me. Bang! A massive dent appeared in the vent. Bang! The seams of the duct began to split apart. Whoever had been hiding under the tarp had climbed the storage racks and squeezed into the ventilation system. And now, they were trying to violently break through the floor of the vent, right above where I was standing. The survival instinct finally kicked in, overriding my frozen muscles. I didn't grab the chairs. I didn't grab my radio. I turned and ran faster than I ever have in my entire life. I tore up the stairs, slammed the fire door, locked it, and sprinted down the main hallway toward the exit. I locked the glass doors of the school from the outside, got into my car, and drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The next afternoon, I had to face Elias. I gave him a watered-down version of the truth.
I told him I thought I saw a shadow in the corner, but when I went back down to check, the room was empty. I didn't mention the vent. I didn't mention the banging. I downplayed it entirely to save face, letting his authority rewrite my terror. He told me my mind was playing tricks on me in the dark and sent me off to clean the cafeteria. It was my final week at that school. I never went near that basement again. I kept my head down, finished my shifts, and left the keys on Elias's desk on my last day. I still don't know who was under that cloth. But sometimes, when the house is completely quiet, I look up at the air vents in my ceiling. I imagine the metal beginning to slowly bend inward. And I wonder, if Elias hadn't shamed me into going back down those stairs, how long would that person have waited in the dark?
If you enjoyed this story, a like is always appreciated. What would you have done in their place? Subscribe for more stories from the dark.